When it comes to planning an application for a demo, a to-do list application is always a good candidate. In this case, I'm not discussing a to-do list because it's that simple, but because of some intricacies it may have in terms of the user experience involved. At the end of the day, a to-do list is about capturing and storing three pieces of information on a per-user basis: description of the task, due date, and optionally a priority. And here is a realistic wireframe for the simplest task screen. Do you really think you have time to waste on discussing this silly piece of user interface with a customer? That's just one screen. And if your application is made of just one screen or maybe two, no, you probably don't want to use wireframes as long as you know the underlying process very, very well. These days, managing a task list, however, entirely from the laptop is not realistic, period. At the very minimum, the website must be mobile friendly. But even in that case, it still requires users to fill out a form through the keyboard. And what about voice input? That probably requires a native application, and your users may just ask for that too. A task sometimes can also be created directly from an email, or perhaps an email to yourself can be sometimes the easiest way to take a quick note. So here we have now two more wireframes to take into account. Let's start looking into the architecture that could back up the user experience we just discussed. From the laptop, you hit a controller, and there will be likely a REST API linked to the mobile application and some email systems you may have. The controller will pass the data in the form down to the application layer, where any workflow for the use case is implemented. The REST API is slightly more direct and just relies on workflows coded in the calling layers, for example, the native app or the email processor. We are talking about an action saving a task that alters the state of the system. So it's a command and likely requires going through business rules and domain-specific pieces of logic and then persistence. Another pretty common use case for a to-do list application is getting the list of pending tasks. Again, you might want to be able to see the list from the site and/or the mobile application. Two more screens are added. The website form pushes a request to the system with something like a date filter. If there is a workflow of some complexity, you might want to have an application layer here. Most commonly, you won't, though. The native app, instead, will use another endpoint in the REST API. From the perspective of the system, getting the list of pending tasks is a query action with no impact on the state of the system. Command and query scenarios add code and logic to two distinct stacks in the same project. In summary, a typical Visual Studio project for an ASP.NET MVC application that works as a to-do list app at least will be made of controllers, application layer, and then business layer split in command and query stacks, largely independent from one another in terms of patterns, technologies, and even in some cases deployment. Then there will be infrastructure. In simplest cases, the same infrastructure, read the same database, is used and shared. But however, in more realistic scenarios, each stack, command, and query has its own persistence layer with some mechanism set to keep the two in sync.